Lieutenant Governor Delgado, how are you?
I'm doing well.
If you're ready, we're going to start.
I'm ready, man.
In the last 3.5 years, as Lieutenant Governor, many voters will ask themselves, what has he done? Doesn't it look like you're betraying Kathy Hochul?
My allegiance, my loyalty is to the people of New York. My loyalty is not to a person.
From Columbia Journalism School in New York City, this is Juan Manuel Benítez Wants to Know. My guest today announced earlier this year that he intended to challenge his boss in 2026. Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado is willing to run against Governor Kathy Hochul in the Democratic primary next June. Delgado represented the Hudson Valley in Congress for 3.5 years before getting appointed as Lieutenant Governor by Hochul in 2022 and getting elected to that position shortly after. Lieutenant Governor Delgado, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
A Siena poll from September showed Kathy Hochul's approval rating at 54%. Why do you think the state of New York needs a different governor?
Quite simply, we need leadership because the status quo is broken. We have folks who are hurting right now all across New York, whether it's a housing crisis, whether it's a healthcare crisis, a childcare crisis, here in a state where we are governed by Democrats and governed by a governor who's a Democrat. We have 1 of 5 kids living in poverty, half those kids living in deep poverty. And the trend lines are only getting worse. Economic inequality is growing. And if we're going to actually move in a direction where we restore people's faith in democracy, restore people's faith in good government, we need bold, decisive, transformational leadership. And I am dedicated to ensuring that we deliver exactly that.
But how do you explain then that Governor Hochul is so popular in the state?
Well, I think we have a different view on what popularity actually means. I think ultimately the numbers bear out that even amongst her own party, not even close to 50% of folks support her. And I would argue that beyond numbers, which I think speak for themselves in terms of the desire to want new change, the direction of the state, a lot of folks don't believe we're heading in the right direction for, I think, obvious reasons. Again, the cost of living, the cost of housing, the cost of healthcare, all these things continue to persist. And people are dissatisfied mightily with the realities of where we're heading as a state. And ultimately, they have not heard any concrete, bold solutions being put forth by the governor in that regard. So in terms of where we're headed, in terms of people's belief, in terms of people's sense of confidence in where the state is moving, I think it's pretty clear that there's a desire and a thirst and a hunger for more, and certainly a desire to move past conventional politics and a broken status quo.
Okay, and the question would be, why you?
Well, thank you for that. Ultimately, I have a vision. I think that's first and foremost. You need somebody who actually has a vision to address the issues that people have every single day. Again, when it comes to housing, the governor's proposal to give tax credits to developers and to hope that that somehow trickles down to everybody else has been proven a failed mode of delivering affordable housing. She's refused to actually have a statewide rental assistance program that would provide economic security for New Yorkers all across the state. I'd also propose a statewide first-time homeowner home buyer grant program. That's something that we don't hear coming from the governor. I believe in universal health care. I don't believe that we need to reinforce a system of care that allows the insurance companies to consistently exploit the people's care for profit. I believe that we should pay child care workers not just a poverty wage, but a living wage. And there is legislation right now in the Assembly and the Senate that would do exactly that. The governor has not signed it. I believe that we should tax the ultra wealthy and big corporations to make sure that we actually share the wealth and lift people up out of poverty and low wage circumstances. The governor refused to do that. There's a clear contrast in terms of the division that I bring to bear and want to bring to bear for all of New Yorkers that I think is important to present to New Yorkers who I believe at this point are looking for change, are looking for bold, decisive leadership. And I believe that given my time, both as Lieutenant Governor, but even before that, as a member of Congress in upstate New York, in a district that, was 90% white and the 8th most rural congressional seat in the country, a seat that Trump had won by 7 points just 2 years prior to me winning it, and a seat no Democrat had ever won. I think I have the ability and the capacity to stitch together the entirety of this state, from upstate to downstate to central New York, western New York, rural, urban, white, black, brown. And we need that now more than ever.
In the last 3.5 years, as Lieutenant Governor, many voters will ask themselves, well, what has he done?
Yes, thank you for that. So a couple of things, right? When I came in as lieutenant governor, one of the most important things I tried to focus on, in addition to serving as a co-chair of the Economic Development Council, as well as leading the Hate and Bias Prevention Unit, where we stood up regional councils all across the state to engage in preventative work when it comes to hate and intolerance that we all know is on the rise here in New York and certainly across the country. We did exactly that and held a unity summit a number of years annually since I became lieutenant governor. And most important, I was able to stand up the state's first office of service and civic engagement. This is a very important office dedicated to ensuring that New Yorkers, particularly our young people, have the opportunity to get paid service opportunities. We launched the SUNY Empire State Service Program, which would give students on SUNY campuses paid positions at nonprofits that are located all across the state, whether that's addressing food insecurity issues, whether that's addressing educational tutorial issues for our young people, mental health, but just trying to make sure that we change the culture of service across the state to ensure that people actually put value on service and are paid, and then ultimately have a connection to government as a result. Oftentimes, folks who do service, particularly young people, they do so from a privileged place. And if we're able to actually pay folks in college who may otherwise be challenged because of their economic situations to not be able to provide those kind of opportunities, it was a big breakthrough, I thought, from the perspective of the state. So we hired the first chief service officer and gave out scholarships all across the state the last couple of years. So very proud of that work as well.
When was that moment in which you realized that you didn't want to be lieutenant governor anymore, but you wanted to run against your boss?
Never had the moment where I didn't want to be lieutenant governor anymore. That's why I'm still lieutenant governor and will finish out my term as lieutenant governor. I'm very proud of the role that the people of New York gave to me independently when I ran back in 2022 in the primary, which I had to run on my own accord. And so certainly feel very obligated to the people who gave me this power in the first place. And I owe them everything that I have in this position and will continue to bring accountability to state government as lieutenant governor of the state. Now, I will say that as time progressed in this role, as it pertains to my dynamic with the governor, it became clear to me pretty early on that things that were said to me, things that were communicated to me in terms of our relationship and our partnership and the manner in which I'd be involved in decision making, all of that, was tested fairly early in our relationship. And we tried to navigate that over the course of the first couple of years. Certainly, as things began to intensify over time, I think things came probably to a head most explicitly when in 2024, there was a presidential election. And I felt it was very important at that time to express my truth and my beliefs, which was that President Biden should step down. The governor did not agree with that position. That was probably the first instance where there was some type of break. And I think the results of the presidential election overall, where we saw President Trump not just win across the country, but make serious inroads here in New York. We saw the largest swings from left to right.
But you can't blame that on Kathy Hochul.
Well, I blame it on failed leadership across the board. And I would
argue you're part
that
of that leadership.
You are correct. And I think we need generational leadership to hold that leadership accountable. At the end of the day, we all have responsibility in this moment. And I don't shirk from responsibility. I believe that at the end of the day, though, when we have the voices who are at the top, the voices who are setting the tone, the voices who are setting the priorities, those are the voices that are most important and critical in this moment. And at the end of the day, we saw right here in New York, the largest swings from left to right in the entire country in 2024. And at that time, the governor of New York, who, by the way, a governor who only won by 6 points back in 2022, was the governor at this time around as well. And we have a responsibility right now, particularly when people are losing confidence in democracy and are basically being overwhelmed by economic inequality, to better understand what's going to be required to deliver bold, decisive leadership in this moment. I believe I can do that.
You were elected on your own right in 2022, but it was weeks after Kathy Hochul appointed you as her lieutenant governor. Obviously, you were running with a huge advantage over the competition at that point. Someone could fairly say that you wouldn't have had an easy time being elected lieutenant governor hadn't been for Kathy Hochul giving you the position right before. So doesn't it look like you're betraying Kathy Hochul?
Let me speak to that. This is a good question. So first and foremost, I think if we go back and look at what happened during that time period, I was a two-term a member of Congress, 18 bills signed into law, 10 signed by Trump in my first term in Congress, ran for re-election and won by 12 points, outperformed Biden by 10. No other member of Congress, except for one other, outperformed him or had a bigger margin of victory. Then won, had 8 bills signed by Biden when I was in my second term, halfway through my second term. 18 bills at that point signed into law, and one of the most effective leaders in Congress. So when the governor had an issue with the prior lieutenant governor, about a month and a half out from the primary in June of 2022, one could make a case that she was in a desperate moment. She had just lost her lieutenant governor. There were two other lieutenant governor candidates who were in the race and have been in the race for an extended period of time, and who did have serious involvement with two other governor candidates at that time and have been able to elevate their profiles accordingly. The governor was in a tough spot, a very tough spot at that moment, without somebody that she thought maybe she could serve with. I was not in a tough spot. I was in a very good spot. I had just won my reelection by 12 points. I'd
So
outperformed
why
Biden.
do you take the job? Why taking the
Had
job then?
won had won in counties that Trump had won himself in Sullivan County, Otsego County, and the opportunity to serve the great state of New York, a state that raised me, a state that gave my family so much. Both my parents being from New York. My wife and I, both growing up only an hour apart, got married in New York. I went to college at Colgate. I love New York, and I love everything New York has to offer. So I was more than excited. Not to mention, I'm a dad and a husband, and I have twin boys that were young at the time. The idea of going back and forth to Washington when I had the choice and the option to come back home and serve the state that I love and be a dad and be a husband, to me was very, very meaningful. And certainly I looked at the opportunity to be an executive. And I thought I was going to be a thought partner. I thought I was going to be a part of the decision-making process, as was expressed to me by the governor explicitly, repeatedly, when we had our initial conversations about what our new kind of partnership would look like, especially when she would tell me about how challenging it was for her to be sidelined when she was a lieutenant governor by Cuomo. So I thought there was some real opportunity to do things differently, to move in a new direction, and make sure that we actually put a new stamp on the dynamic between a governor and lieutenant governor and what the state could actually need in that moment. I was very excited to come back to New York, to come back home and to serve the great state of New York. And so with all that in mind, the ability to bring my skill set and what I've been able to accomplish in Congress was certainly something I look forward to doing.
But it sounds to me that you were offered a job, you were appointed to it, you were elected to it, and then you realized that the job wasn't what they promised you the job was going to be. So why not leaving? Why not resigning if you're not comfortable with the position the governor has put you in? You're not doing the job that you thought you were going to do. Why not resigning if you're running full time for governor right now?
Well, I'm still lieutenant governor. I'm still engaging with folks all across this state. I'm still engaging with communities all across this state who take great pride in the fact that I am lieutenant governor. Whether it's young people in communities of color, whether it's making sure that I visit college campuses, whether it's engaging with small businesses, not to mention, I think it's important as lieutenant governor that I continue to take my role as a touch point within the Senate, the presiding officer of the Senate, to develop and advocate for legislation that I think is critically important for New Yorkers. It's a very, very important role that comes with independent power that was bestowed upon me by the people of New York. The governor, I don't serve at the pleasure of. I just simply don't. I serve with the pleasure of the people who gave me the power in the first place. And I take that responsibility very, very seriously. And so the notion that I would walk away from that kind of a commitment, that kind of obligation when it was given to me by the people, and by the way, an obligation that I think I earned, an obligation that I think that over the course of my life and over the course of my time in Congress, again, where I had 18 bills signed into law and brought, I thought, a lot to the table that would elevate the administration. The notion that I would walk away from my own agency and walk away from the value that I can bring to bear for those who are relying upon real leadership in the state. And I want to go back to a point you used the word betrayal, earlier, which I didn't really get a chance to speak directly to. My allegiance, my loyalty, and this ties to this point that you're asking, is to the people of New York. My loyalty is not to a person. My loyalty is not to party. And my loyalty is certainly not to profit or power. My loyalty is to the people who gave me the power in the first place. And I would argue that a lot of our elected officials, particularly the governor, I might add, far too often operate from a place of self-preservation. The easiest thing in the world for me, to be candid with you, at this point, would be to just fall in line and just not do anything and just sort of sit around.
The governor is punishing
Severely.
you for this.
Yes, there's been political retribution, unquestionably. And when that retribution was exacted, sir, it was exacted at a moment where all I had actually said was, I don't intend to run for reelection. And in response to that, the governor leveraged official power and said, okay, well, we'll take away your offices. We'll cut your staff significantly and move them to other places. We'll reduce the footprint of the office of lieutenant governor, which means we will reduce the footprint of the power of the people. And I think that is not all that different than some of the critiques that we often raise when it comes to Trump's abuse of power, when it comes to political retribution. And I think that's been normalized. I think a lot of folks hear that and they go, well, that's kind of comes to the territory. And I would argue, well, if it comes to territory, maybe there's a problem with the territory. And maybe we should figure out a way to change it and get beyond that mode of governance, because it's not really meeting the people where they are. It's taking the people's power and leveraging it for your own personal gain.
You were just in Puerto Rico with most of the New York State elected officials. What was the reaction from your Democratic colleagues? Are you trying to lobby them for support? We know that Governor Hochul, the fact that Zohra Mamdani was elected the mayor of New York City, and she had been supporting him the same way that you were supporting him. So what was the reception that you got from your fellow elected officials in Albany? Do you feel that any of them will be willing to support your candidacy?
Absolutely. Reception was great. And I just want to make a couple of points because you said a few things. One, you're right. I endorsed Zoran within 24 hours of his election. The governor took about 3 months or so before she got there and ultimately backed into it. And I think that's an important dynamic when you're thinking about what a real partner could look like moving forward and what real change could look like when we're talking about taxing the rich and we're talking about actually delivering things that Mamdani campaigned on over the course of this campaign. The governor just recently said that she's, not willing to even engage on buses, free buses. I think there's one thing to be able to say something, quite another to have a desire to do it. And I think this is certainly what I would believe is a point of distinction between myself and the governor. I don't just say things; I do what I say. Now, back to your question in terms of the energy, in Puerto Rico, I felt very, very warm energy, very warm reception from the folks on the ground. You mentioned the governor was riding high. I mean, well, I think, one of the things that did happen while she was there was that she had to deal with a chant from the folks that said tax the rich. And then she had to turn around and deal with the fact that she approved the Nessie pipeline, which is a pipeline that basically is going to put New Yorkers in harm's way, is increasing frack gas all across our state. I was able to stand with electeds, from Brisport to Gallagher, who were willing to stand with me, Salazar, who were willing to stand with me, and point out the fact that the notion that the governor will capitulate to Trump in this way and fast track these water quality permits, despite having been denied 3 times over, the science hasn't changed at all. And yet the governor felt the need to rule differently in this regard. And the only thing that's changed is Trump. And so, having the ability to stand there and uplift an issue that I think is of critical importance with partners like Citizen Action and NYCC and others who care deeply about protecting New Yorkers against polluted water, certainly was something that I was excited to do and will continue to do moving forward. And yes, I had a number of great conversations with my colleagues in government, a lot of whom believe that, change is needed right now. We have to move forward.
Can you give us names?
I think it's better at this point to let time tell you those names, and time will.
So to be clear, you'll be pushing for taxing the rich, like the mayor-elect Zohra Mamdani wants. You'll be willing to offer free buses, given the control of the MTA that the governor has. So you are for those policy proposals.
What I'm for is no question increasing taxes on the ultra wealthy and big corporations in a fashion that will help to speak to a number of the proposals that Mamdani has put forth, particularly around childcare and certainly around buses. I think there's a lot of opportunities to move forward on a number of issues through a real commitment to address economic inequality that I think is very, very important. So yes, I think when the governor says things like, she has no desire, and she's done this repeatedly, she has no desire to raise taxes on the ultra wealthy or big corporations because she's afraid that particularly the wealthy will move to Palm Beach. These are her words. That to me, I think, stresses a disconnect between the reality, which is that the vast majority of New Yorkers who are leaving the state of New York make between $30,000 and $1,000 a year. But according to her, those folks, if they were to leave, would move to Palm Beach. But they're not moving to Palm Beach because they can't afford that either. So the fact of the matter is we have to do a lot more in New York to make it affordable and to address the cost of living everywhere across the city and the state. And when you have 2 out of 10 households, 2 out of 5 households across New York that can't afford basic necessities from energy costs to groceries, that's a real challenge when you have 1 out of 4 New Yorkers who can't afford these things. Basic needs right here in the great blue state of New York, while we have literally the first trillionaire in Musk. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a level of true moral bankruptcy if we can't figure out how to right this ship appropriately.
Budget negotiations, I'm sure they're going to start really quickly. So as lieutenant governor, because you're still lieutenant governor, the
Yes.
budget needs to be approved by April 1st. How are you going to support Mamdani's agenda in Albany?
We both agree that there's an imbalance right now between people power and corporate power, that there's an imbalance between those who have the few that have a lot and the many that don't have enough. And, to the extent that I can leverage my position as lieutenant governor to elevate critical issues, whether it's in the housing space, whether it's in the healthcare space, whether it's in the childcare space, and work in partnership with members of the state Senate, members of the state assembly, advocacy groups to put a spotlight on those issues that are, I think, of most concern to everyday folks, whether it's the wages that they make, whether it's the cost of their healthcare or the cost of housing. There's a lot of work being done in Albany and will be done that I think from my vantage point, I have the ability to really uplift, and certainly would hope that in doing so, that those in Albany, including the governor, understand that, these issues aren't going anywhere and that there will be accountability brought to bear as we move forward on these issues. And I appreciate the fact that I have that kind of power in this moment, that I am actually in a position of independence and have the ability to shape conversations and to motivate people, maybe to do things they wouldn't have otherwise been willing to do, but for the fact that I am in the position that I am in. And I think it's important, to understand how valuable that is to me, because for me, this is not about making a career out of politics. That's not what drove me to get into politics. It's understanding.
And I wanted to ask you about that. Because people know about you as lieutenant governor. People know you about being a Congress member, representing the Hudson Valley. But when was that moment? You were a successful lawyer as well. And when was that moment in which you realized that you wanted to dedicate your life to public service?
Juan, thank you. I appreciate that, because it is an important question for folks to hear me answer. I was compelled to serve. Like you said, I had been a lawyer at a corporate law firm for 7 years. Before that, I was a hip hop artist. After graduating from law school, my parents were a little surprised by that decision, but I went out to LA and, pursued a career as a hip hop artist. I was not successful, obviously, financially, but certainly learned a lot, because the struggle that I had to overcome through that led me to find the strength 1 year out from making partner at a law firm to change my entire life along with my wife, Lacey, and our little boys at the time. And to say, instead of going down that path and staying on that path as a lawyer, to run for Congress. When Trump won in 2016, like a lot of people, it rocked me. It rocked me to the core. And as somebody who grew up in a faith-based home, Black Baptist church, rooted very much in the civil rights movement, always feeling like there was work to be done, finished work to be done in the realm of justice, whether it's racial, but also economic justice. I've always felt compelled with that mission, aligned with that work, and always try to figure out ways to engage with that work, specifically through music, but also even when I did pro bono work, it was always at the forefront. And I always kind of had it, in me to do more. But Trump, there's no question, sort of flushed all that up to the surface and made me decide at that point, along with the support of my wife, to call the question to myself: am I ready to do more? Am I ready to give more of myself? Am I ready to make sacrifices for the greater good? And to do that, to me, that meant public service. That meant walking away from the private sector and jumping in. So everybody did something different when Trump won. Some folks registered to vote, other folks protested and did things they hadn't done. For me, it literally led to a change in my entire life, in my wife's entire life. And it's been amazing, challenging, no question. But the work of service, the work of lifting up communities, the work of figuring out how to restore people's hope in government, which to me was at risk and still is at risk. When I ran back in 2016, I was really deeply concerned with the idea of what democracy and what government meant to the people. And it was a lesson, last point on this, that if you are outside of it, if you're not willing to give to it, rather than being so concerned with the ceiling and how far you can go, it became clear to me that the bottom can bottom out, that it can get worse, that we can backslide, that really bad actors can step into the void and do horrible, horrible things to the welfare and well-being of our country. And I felt compelled, literally compelled in that moment to serve. It wasn't about making a career. It wasn't about how do I, gain more success. I was, like you said, I was successful. I was doing very well. But the reason why I'm in this now is because I care deeply. And I feel like it's some very, very important work at this particular moment.
I have to ask you now, what's at the top of your music playlist at the moment?
At this very moment,
Yes.
oh man. Well, I've been listening to a lot of Kendrick Lamar. I'm a big fan of Kendrick Lamar. His new album, GNX, I like, but I actually, if I really want to zone out, Mr. Morales, that's the album that I'll go to. I just think he's an artistic genius. When I was thinking about the kind of artist I wanted to be when I set about the journey back in 2005, he was kind of it. He's figured out how to marry in a commercial way, really politically conscious, socially conscious music that is quite profound and just deeply artistic. I mean, he's a master. And so I find myself often drawn to him. And then I think what's really fresh, because I'd be remiss to not bring this up, I was very much a big fan of D'Angelo. And with the recent passing of D'Angelo, I started to go back, to Brown Sugar, Black Messiah, and go back and listen to some of his amazing work. And you talk about a genius. You talk about somebody who had it all. He was really unbelievable. So I've been dipping back more into D'Angelo since we lost him. And that was a tragic loss, a gut punch.
When it comes to reading, anything interesting that you're reading at the moment?
Yes. I just finished a book called White Poverty by Reverend Barber. Really powerful book. It's a book that I've had for a while and I kept, meaning to read. It's been on my shelf for a bit. And I finally was able to get through it. And it's a powerful book because it speaks to, the way in which, despite the fact that I think historically we've racialized poverty to look Black, to look brown, the fact of the matter is the vast majority of folks, the majority of people who are poor in America are white, and that number is growing. And I think it's important for us at this time in particular, where we see growing economic inequality, but also communities being scapegoated, whether it's our immigrant community in particular, but other communities as well. We see the assault on Black history in particular too. I think that there's a wisdom in trying to figure out how to connect folks to their shared economic pain beyond race. And I think white poverty has a lot of great tidbits and nuggets in there that I think help to sort of contextualize where we are and how the plight of poverty knows no color right now in America.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself, about your personal life. What do you do? What do you like doing on your time off when you're not lieutenant governor or exercising the role of lieutenant governor? What is it that you like doing with your family or without your family? Like, what are those things that you do?
I love being a dad. I got twin boys, Maxwell, named after the R&B artist Maxwell, Coltrane, obviously named after John Coltrane. I love those guys. They're identical twins. They have tremendous energy. And my wife, who is literally my soulmate, I met her back in law school and fell in love with her literally upon first sight. I told the guy sitting next to me that she's my partner, she's my wife, and I hadn't even said a word to her at that point. And she's just such an anchor for me. And so being with the family, and we have our dog, Leroy. So being with the family, being with the dog, just hanging out. I'm not a big board game player, but Lacey and the boys love playing board games. And so I like to play with them, whether it's Risk is a big one, Catan is another big one, Ticket to Ride. We're big board game or cards. We'll play spades, but we like to play games a lot. We like, obviously watch movies together. But for me personally, you mentioned exercising, but I thought you were going to say exercise, like literally exercising. I like to exercise.
I mean, you were a basketball player too, right?
Yes. And I like to, my kids are actually starting to get into basketball. We just played a little basketball this weekend in our driveway. Mm-hmm. They have tryouts coming up for modified basketball. And so we thought we'd go out there and get some shots up and practice before their tryouts. Basketball has always been, it's my first love, actually. I played at Colgate, went to the NCAA tournament, which was a great memory for me. Colgate is Division I, so it was a good experience to have that. We were a 16th seed. We were not a top seed at the time, but we played Ray Allen when they had UConn, when they had Ray Allen on the team. So basketball is definitely a passion, a love of mine. Music is a passion and love of mine. I like going for long walks to clear the head, but really, hanging out with the family to me is the most important, just being able to spend time and laugh and be silly.
And last question, Lieutenant Governor, you know that New York City residents, it's really hard to get them out of the city. And everything that it's north in the Bronx, then that's upstate for them. Is there one specific place, because you come from Schenectady, one specific place in the state of New York that every New York City person should visit?
My gosh, a special place in New York State. I'm not going to name a specific place. I will say this. I have a bias. I believe that the Hudson Valley, when you drive up through the Hudson Valley, whether it's Dutchess County, Columbia County, or the Catskills, Greene County, Schoharie County, my old district that I represented back when I was in Congress, I cannot tell you, a fall drive, an autumn drive through the Hudson Valley is one of my favorite things to do. It is, especially when you come from the city. And I have a lot of friends who come up from the city and make that drive. And that's one of the things that they remark on. It's just how serene and just the scenery, and it's majestic. And you come out of the city and it's the hustle and bustle, it's the noise, it's the big buildings, all the people. But if you really want to get another perspective on the majesty of the state of New York, drive through the Hudson Valley and make your way through the Catskills and just pop out. Just great places to park and just look out on the mountains. And it's truly remarkable that all of this can be in one state, which of course makes New York the state to be in the entire country. So that's what I would say.
Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of Juan Manuel Benítez Wants to Know. You can follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Substack. Please give us a follow, leave a review, write a comment. That's it for today in New York City. I'm Juan Manuel Benítez.